All right. Hey, everyone. I'm here with my old friend and colleague, Michelle Hutchinson. Michelle did a PhD in philosophy at Oxford, ran Given What We Can, helped set up the Global Priorities Institute, and then came over to lead 80,000 hours career advising, which she's been doing for about the last 3 years. We're also both up here at 9:30 in the morning. We're not morning people and slightly struggling, but fingers crossed this will go all right anyway. Welcome to the show / the Q&A fireside chat, Michelle.
Thanks. Likewise, Rob.
All right, we gotta go fast. We've only got 25 minutes. So to kick off, it seems like EA has become a lot more long-termism focus over the last 8 years, at least in the UK. But you were actually pretty into long-termism when we met back in 2012. So I legit cannot remember your backstory on this. Maybe you told me this years ago. But where did you start focusing on long-termism, and kind of how did that come about?
Yeah, so I had been pretty into Peter Singer and thinking about how to help people in poverty from back when I was in school. But then at university, I studied ethics and thought a bunch more about which people I thought it was most important to help. And in particular, thinking about things like how much do I think it matters if someone is hurt or harmed in some way in the future compared to now, and the fact that actually, I think it just doesn't matter whether someone's suffering in the future or now. The suffering weighs just as strongly on us. And then was also learning a lot about what the future might look like, and just thinking more about the fact that there just could be unimaginably large numbers of people in the future compared to now, and how heavily that would weigh on us. And I think, yeah, EA didn't exist at the time, so I guess it was a more slow lead-in than some people get now, because I felt like I was more putting 2 and 2 together for myself. But I think that was really how I ended up thinking through these kinds of things. I initially was most focused on assuming that people exist. Clearly, we should be helping them, and was less convinced that it was very important to make sure that people get to live in the first place. And I think the thing that really changed my mind on that was thinking a bunch about how I would compare the value of an entirely empty world compared to a world with a person in, and realizing that I just don't think that a world without any people in has any value, whereas I do in fact think that a world with a happy person in is valuable. And then that I don't think that there's some magic thing about one person as opposed to the 1,000,001th person or something. And so in fact, I just think that bringing into existence people who have flourishing lives is just the thing that's valuable in the world. So that's how I ended up coming to think that this was really important. And then despite that, I ended up initially in my career working on global poverty because I thought that it was going to be really hard to get other people working on more future-focused issues, and wasn't sure exactly which ones to do that with and things. So I was working on Giving What We Can. But then I think actually effective altruism in general has got a lot more traction than I was expecting. And I've now learned a bunch more about what kinds of things we might be able to do to help the longer run future. So that's how I end up working on it as well. So what about you, Rob?
Whoa, let's see, it crossed my mind back. I think it took almost immediately with me. Actually, I was like already very into Peter Singer and utilitarian ethics and things like that. And I think I found out about long-termism from running into Nick Bostrom's website or the Future of Humanity's website back in like the late 2000s. And I think I read the astronomical waste paper where Bostrom talks about, yeah, how much we're forgoing like enormous amounts of pleasure, enormous amounts of positive stuff that we could be creating with all of the matter and energy up in space. I was like, oh yeah, that's right, we are. I really thought about that. To be honest, it's a bit of an oversight on my part, but then yeah, it just seems then apparent if you're like, wow, almost all the matter and energy is up outside of the Earth, and we got to like go and make the best use of that. I think that very naturally then leads into kind of a long-termist attitude. I think even though I like intellectually agreed with it for like many years, I didn't really have any idea what to do. So it was like one of those ideas was like intellectually you agree, but then are you like acting on it? Is it like actually a part of your life?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Not really, because yeah.
how that happens for a surprising while, because I feel like I was pretty similar, and I would have expected that I'd have come across these ideas and been like, wow, this is really important. I should figure out how to act on this. And yet that penny didn't quite drop, and it sounds like it was the same for you.
Well, I think I would have felt more tortured about it. I would have been like, I should be doing this thing. This is like the most important from a moral point of view, given my views. But then on a day-to-day basis, if like for a month at a time, there's nothing you can do that you feel is relevant, then maybe you just feel like you're not. It's actually quite frustrating because like, well, I'm not really living up to my values, but I also don't really know what I ought to do. I think kind of nudged me to think more about like security and government careers and military careers. But I mean, I was in Australia at the time, which is like, it's a bit less obvious. If I'd been in the US, and I would be like, well, I should go into like national security, or there would be like obvious paths that would jump to mind. But because Australia is probably not going to destroy the world, it's somewhat more challenging to figure out how to prevent us from doing that in Australia. Yeah, you've been working on this new piece that hasn't come out yet, and which I've diligently not read, so you can surprise me now, on ways that people might find it kind of psychologically challenging to get on board with long-termism. And I guess ways that people might get over those if they don't really endorse them on reflection. Yeah, what do you think are the psychological things that might like stop people from embracing a view that they otherwise would agree with?
Yeah, the piece is actually more good work, by the way, not reading it, on my specific ways of finding it hard. I think people find it tough in a bunch of different ways. And in particular, my like reason for finding it emotionally hard to work on long-termism is fairly closely tied to global poverty and the people who are suffering and dying of avoidable diseases in poor countries, whereas I think for other people, probably including you, it weighs more heavily on them, the amount of suffering in factory farms that we're not doing things about. So I want to caveat that these are some reasons I find it hard rather than what I expect everyone to feel.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, there are just, so many diseases out there that we know how to prevent and cure that we're not doing, and that it really feels to me like there's some strong sense in which this suffering should not be happening, and we actually have a bunch of ways of preventing it, for which there's a bunch of evidence. We just like know that this kind of thing would work if only we put really not that large amounts of money into it. And that feels like it actually puts on us a very strong duty to be doing that, which is quite hard to get out of. And by contrast, I think the kinds of arguments that say that we should be working on problems in the long run future feel more speculative, depend on more careful weighing of different considerations. And that makes it feel kind of hard to me to feel that this is definitely the right kind of thing to be doing when we have these like strong, compelling duties. And then on the other hand, this like speculative argument that probably would actually be even better to do this other kind of thing. In particular, you have things like the fact that it feels like if we don't help people in the long run future, then presumably someone coming after us can pick up that ball. Whereas the people that we allow to die this year for want of a preventable cure will just definitely die and be grieved for this year.
Yeah, interesting. I was trying to think, as you said, I've always felt like a bit more conflicted about long-termist work versus preventing factory farming or preventing animal suffering. I was just thinking, why is it that I'm more drawn to that? I mean, one I might argue that the suffering on factory farms is larger, or maybe on some instinctive level it feels like it's more severe, more grabbing. But I think another thing actually is that helping people in poverty and like trying to improve the long-term future both feel to me like obligations of beneficence, of like trying to make the world better to help people. When the factory farming like pulls on the injustice, moral axis, or like it feels like you've got a conflict between like, it's not just utilitarianism or like different ways of making the world better, but it's like trying to prevent something that's like actively harmful. That's an injustice that's being done to people. I think many people feel that poverty is also an injustice, and in some sense it is, but it's slightly different because it's not being like actively done by people intentionally. It's more like a natural state of affairs that's like unfortunate. Or actually, I suppose in cases where people are being forced into poverty because of like the bad actions of others, maybe I would feel like it's pulling on this injustice, like moral axis that feels in intention.
Yeah, I think another thing that might be going on more with the factory farming case is I think one reason that helping people in the future pulls very strongly on me is this feeling of they just can't have a voice. There's just no way for them to lobby for themselves, and we have absolute power over them. And I think that's just more the case in factory farming cases than it is people living in poor countries. Like, there's a bunch of reasons why it's hard for them to lobby for themselves, but fundamentally they are like people who are alive at the same time as us, in a way that future people just can't lobby us in any way, and chickens on factory farms can't lobby us in any way.
Yeah. I guess, how did you, I suppose the path must have been that on some intellectual level you thought, well, I should probably focus on long-termism, and so then it's a question of how do you motivate yourself if you're convinced by the arguments? What did you find helped with that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One is when I find it hard to be motivated and find myself having intuitive objections or something, articulating them explicitly and talking to people with similar values to me. And you know this because you're one of the people to whom I often come with like, but shouldn't we really be doing this other thing though? I find that very useful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, well, it's a separate issue of how do you motivate yourself on a day-to-day basis, given that you can't really see the beneficiaries. Where I guess I don't think I've found that to be so challenging, mostly just because I think on a day-to-day basis, I'm mostly motivated by like wanting to be a good colleague and to be a good person who's like collaborating with others on this project. But it's possible we'd be even more motivated if we could like see the long-termist beneficiaries of our actions, who regrettably, hopefully, will only exist after we're dead.
I think I typically haven't found that that's the case when I compare when I was working on global development versus on long-termism. I think this like being a good colleague and not letting the people around me down, in fact, was doing most of the work. I think the real thing is having more like kind of crises of faith sometimes, and suddenly having this feeling of like, whoa, maybe I'm just wasting my time here, and in fact I could have used this time and these resources to really make a tangible difference to people whose lives are really bad.
Yeah, were there any other barriers to embracing long-termism that we should talk about?
I mean, I think that was really fundamentally the big one for me. There's also the question of, okay, but what actually concretely do you do, even if you feel motivated to do it? And that does seem like a very difficult kind of question. But I think to me, it feels more tractable once I'm feeling emotionally on board with the idea that I should be doing the kind of speculative but highest in expectation thing, because then if it's really difficult to figure out what to do, then the answer is, okay, well, clearly I need to do more research.
Interesting.
Does that sound right to you, or do you feel like this is actually the biggest problem for you?
Well, I was just thinking on the risk aversion issue. I often find something that comforts me about that is that on like an individual level, if you're engaging in a risky bet, then there's like a high chance that it won't pay off and it will all be squandered. But then if everyone's doing this, like billions of people are willing to take risks in order to get a higher expected value, then it's much more likely, or very likely, that things will go better, because you get like it's like the more rolls of the dice you get, the more things kind of average out. And then I imagine like how many great opportunities to do good, or like how much opportunity to improve the world would be wasted if each person was individually focused on their impact alone and trying to like play it safe. It's like so many important things just couldn't be done because there'd be no one available to do them. Whereas if like everyone's willing, at least like open to taking the risky option, because it's like better in the bigger picture across like everyone's efforts. Once we've got like the diversification across so many altruists, Yeah, I personally find that very compelling, but I haven't always been able to persuade people with that argument.
Yeah, no, I do think that's a great point. I think in general, it's harder to take a kind of portfolio approach than it should be. I think it's the same across different causes and different types of jobs as it is with risk, where I think that it is in fact the case that a bunch of effective altruists should be working on near-term issues like global poverty for reasons like moral uncertainty. And I think in general, particularly as effective altruists, because we tend to be wanting to optimize all the time and think, how could I be doing even more effectively or something? It's hard to take this overall view of, okay, I think that the movement as a whole should be doing some really risky things and some safer things and some things working on this cause and some things aiming at earning a bunch of money so that we don't run out of those resources, and some things that are direct work and things. And where does my comparative advantage lie? And that kind of thinking is like maybe suits less the kind of person that optimizes everything than the thinking of like, but what can I do that's the most effective right now?
Yeah. So I was just taking a quick gander at the questions people have been submitting in Swapcard. And the top one is one that we kind of had already planned to get to, which is that a lot of people in the audience are going to be living in a city where, as I was saying, it's a little bit harder to like figure out what is the natural long-termist option to do in the country that I'm in, because we don't have nuclear weapons or a biological weapons program or something terrible like that.
What a shame.
So yeah, so for people who are in Sydney or Hong Kong or something rather than in DC or San Francisco or London, yeah, what might you recommend to someone you were advising in that situation who isn't sure what career they might want to pursue if they want to have a big impact?
Yeah, I think the kind of natural option that our website suggests, and partly because you're Australian living in London, is emigrating and finding a job that will get you a visa going to the UK or US. But I think that can be very frustrating for people because obviously a lot of people don't have that option. So we've been trying to release some more pieces recently that give more support for people looking at figuring out for themselves what the best option is for them to take. So one that we just released is our career planning process summary, which goes through, it's a fairly comprehensive article about how you might go about planning your career. And then another one that we released this year was on other long-termist paths that we think are particularly promising, covering things like nonprofit entrepreneurship. Another one that I've been thinking about recently is I feel like I don't know as many EAs working for international bodies like the UN as I would want, because I'd really like us to be thinking about how we improve global governance and actually engaging with the bodies that exist that could be doing this seems like an important part of that to me. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I think those jobs can be challenging to get, but yeah, would from a long-termist point of view, it'd be fantastic to have more people in these organizations who have that mentality. Yeah, so I guess on the other paths and problems, there are quite a few more that are viable to pursue from a country other than the US or UK, especially I guess becoming an expert in perspective like future technologies and trying to forecast like ways that things could go well or badly and like how we ought to react to those as those technologies develop. It's something you can do in Australia as well as you can in the US, really. There's no particular reason, yeah, why you need to be in one place or the other.
Yeah, I also think taking a job that pays more than you would have otherwise and donating a significant fraction is something that we don't talk about as much as we could. And I've been really pleased recently that Luke Freeman, who was also talking at this conference, has recently taken over running Giving What We Can and is doing more of a push to get people to take the Giving What We Can pledge to give 10% of their income to the most effective causes, which I was actually going to mention earlier also as a way in which I think I can help myself to be motivated to work on the thing that I think is really most effective, because I think donations as well as my time is something where I find it a bit hard to donate to the organization I genuinely think does the most good and then not continue donating some to, for example, distributing bed nets. And I think having taken the Giving What We Can pledge makes a big difference there. I, in fact, give a small donation each year in addition typically to the Against Malaria Foundation. But I always give the 10% that I pledge to the most effective organizations.
Yeah, so I guess conveniently for us, owning to give is kind of back on the table for long-termists, because the arguments that Phil Trammell has put forward, I guess somewhat reworking arguments that had been made before, but yeah, making a case that even for a long-termist, donating money and then investing it for a long period of time in order to spend at some crucial moment in the future when it seems like you could really shift the trajectory of humanity one way or the other by using it well, which could be in decades or hundreds of years time. Yeah, there's I guess, yeah, there's an 80,000 Hours podcast episode if you like to get a bit of a summary of Phil Trammell's take on the arguments for and against doing that. But if he's right, that's very good from the location point of view, because you can earn to give fit more easily in a wide range of countries than you can work on national security issues that are relevant to long-termism. So yeah, if you're thinking that earning to give is the way to go, and you're also curious about long-termism, maybe you want to check out whether you buy Philip Trammell's arguments about patient long-termism. Just looking through the questions here, there's another one about advice. So maybe I'll just ask a different one first, because we had some questions on advice and they're all ready to go. So yeah, a month or two ago, you wrote this piece on the EA forum on how to get useful advice out of people. I guess especially people who don't have all of that much time to give you. What do you think is the most important point to remember from that piece?
Yeah, I think really the highlight was it's good to plan in advance and to be as considerate as possible. And the planning in advance looks both figuring out really what's the crucial thing, what's the consideration that would change your mind that you most want advice on, and then also doing things like write an agenda if you're going to talk to someone. And then the being considerate piece, I think the kinds of things that you might want to consider is giving people a wide range of options of how to give you advice. Are they going to prefer having a conversation? Are they going to prefer giving you notes in writing, that kind of thing? And then just thanking people and being as clear as possible that they're really helping you.
Yeah, so the question here was why aren't there more individuals or organizations doing formal career advising yet? And do we think that knowledgeable, engaged DAs should open up career advising slots on the regular? Yeah, what do you think of that? It's one I haven't thought about.
Sorry, should open up slots on the...
Should engage DAs who aren't professional career advisors, should they have regular slots perhaps where they advise people on their careers as part of their way of having impact?
I mean, I definitely do think that people discussing with each other their career plans and helping keep each other accountable and things like that is something that would be great, because I think it's pretty hard to reason through and debug on your own, particularly if you don't know many people with similar goals to you. And also it's surprisingly aversive to do things like apply for jobs. And so having more people having those kinds of conversations sounds really great to me. I guess I worry when things are presented in terms of giving careers advice that people might assume you're going to actually have answers. And I certainly feel like people come to us thinking we'll know what the effective thing for them to do is, and I just definitely don't. So I think framing things kind of carefully seems important, but in general, this sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, the problem I might have with this is just based on my own experience, where people come and ask, what should I do with my career? And they'll give me maybe a 1 or 2 minute spiel of their situation and then ask my opinion. And I'm just it's just not enough background information. It's almost irresponsible to start giving recommendations at that point. I mean, I can ask questions that might be useful, but unfortunately, it seems I think the best advice is going to come from people who know you really well, or at least I've spent a couple of hours or at least half an hour trying to understand what your situation is, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what opportunities you do and don't have, what things you're going to like and what things you're not going to like. Without that, it does just feel somewhat arbitrary, the things that you're suggesting, and you definitely wouldn't stand by them. I guess it's possible it's better to go to a smaller number of people asking for career advice, but then actually give them a lot of information and maybe write up a document that does summarize all of the key points so that you don't miss something important that they need to know before they give a suggestion.
Yeah, I think that kind of structure of writing up quite a lot of background of your decision and what you think the crucial things are. And then, as you say, running it by a number of people, some of whose specialisms might be knowing a bit about a path you're going to pursue, and some of whom specialisms might be more like just knowing you really well, sounds like a really good way of tackling this problem.
All right. Unfortunately, we're already over time. 25 minutes is so little. But
short.
I'm sorry we didn't get to the parenting stuff. But Michelle Hutchinson writes on the Effective Altruism Forum. You can go and check out her long piece on what she's learned by recently becoming a parent. Yeah. Otherwise, thanks so much for getting up at the same time as me, and thanks so much for.
Likewise, I think it's even worse for you.
Thanks so much for staying up late in the East to listen to us. Yeah, this has been fun.